Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Mark Ireland. Mark Ireland is the author of Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, and The Persistence of the Soul, moving accounts of his personal quest for answers about life after death, subsequent to the unexpected passing of his youngest son. Mark is also the son of renowned mid-20th century psychic medium Richard Ireland and co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, an organization with more than 35,000 members that assists grieving parents. Additionally, Mark has participated in mediumship research studies conducted by the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia. Mark, welcome to the program today. I am very happy to have you as a guest, and I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to it as well. It's not often I get to have more academically focused kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I have been an admirer of your work from afar for a long time. As I mentioned before we went on the air, I didn't make the connection that you were co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, an organization which I'm a member of, and I've been very fond of their work because they really entertain different perspectives and spiritual perspectives, and they really create paradigm shifts that help, I think, parents move through grief and come to acceptance of their life as is, more so than perhaps any other traditional grief approaches. So, and I know there's a story behind how Helping Parents Heal started, and I'd like you to share that before we get into talking about your book, All Things Mediums, Synchronicity. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how Helping Parents Heal formed?
Sure. Well, first off, I would say that the reason we exist and the reason that we've grown so rapidly is because we're kind of a unicorn in the field. We're the only organization for bereaved parents that allows the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence. And so that differentiator is a big one because it provides the hope element. Other groups, some of the folks who come to us now or have joined us had gone to other types of groups in the past and just saw some folks were stuck in grief. And 10 years later, they were still in the same place and really we're still just talking about how painful it was and reliving that day and all those sorts of things. But the origins of it are rather interesting. First book, Soul Shift, had just come out, and I was doing a workshop. During a break, I was in Arizona in the Phoenix area. A woman approached me during a break and she says, "Hey, my name's Suzanne Wilson. I just moved here from Florida. The reason I'm here is because I wanted to meet like-minded people." So we chatted a bit. She actually gave me a couple of validations that were humorous, but it told me she had some ability. She said, "I'm already a medium, but here's some proof for you." And then she said, "It's interesting that your son passed on a mountain because I recently encountered a woman whose son had also passed on a mountain, the Himalayas on the other side of the world." And so I said to her, "Well, here's a copy of my book and a card with my contact information. Why don't you give this to her and maybe it'll help her?" But a couple of days later, then I got a call from Elizabeth Boyson, and she says, "Hey, Mark, I read your book in one sitting, or 2 sittings, I can't remember. I loved it. I want to meet you and your wife." So we met within probably a week. And then she explained to me that she had this Facebook group called Parents United in Loss. And to that point, it had only been, online communication, but she had arranged to have her very first in-person meeting up in Cave Creek, Arizona. And so she says, "Will you be my inaugural speaker?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure. Why not?" So a couple of weeks later, I go. She draws 30 to 40 people to this. It goes pretty well, and then she starts having meetings once a month. I go to them when I can. Fast forward a little more than a year, and I'm changing jobs, and I'm talking to one of my other medium friends. We'll get into that later because I know Tina Powers in Tucson. And she says, "Hey, Mark, I think your real calling in life is to help other parents who've been through the same thing you've been through. Why don't you think about starting an organization to do that?" I thought, okay. And then I started, thinking about what it would look like and what it needed. And I thought, well, Elizabeth has a pretty good thing going, but it's just one group in one location. She doesn't have a website, doesn't have a newsletter. And so it occurred to me to give her a call and just say, "Hey, Elizabeth, any chance you'd want to partner with me on this and blow it out?" What we do is take, the blueprint of the meetings that you conduct and then take it out and see if we can set up other folks in other locations. And I'll help you put a website together, and I'll help you put a newsletter together. And then, we'll get that content out there. And she's like, "Oh, I love that." And I said, "And maybe a new name like Helping Parents Heal." And she goes, "Oh, I love that name. I hated the other name. It was too negative." So that's how it started. And really, the origins were, the people that had come to the original meetings, some of them became board members. And then I don't remember how we, ended up getting all these affiliates set up. I think it was just put out on Facebook, and through word of mouth and social media, it just kind of exploded. Initially, it was like, 5 or 10 chapters. It's been in the last 8 years, it's just been like an avalanche of activity. So yeah, today we have, I think, over 170 affiliates worldwide, not just in the US, but overseas as well. And then every other year we have a conference, and we completely sell out a resort with 1,100 attendees. We have some great presenters that come from all different disciplines. We have folks who are in the therapy area. We have top mediums. We have people who talk about near-death experience phenomena and all that. And we've had some big name people over the years, from James Van Prague to Gordon Smith on the medium end, and Suzanne Giesman and Suzanne Wilson to Dr. Eben Alexander's worked with us before on some of our Zooms. Dr. Raymond Moody has been supportive of us and done multiple things. It's really the whole package is coming together. Now it's just the biggest challenge is managing something of this size. And Elizabeth serves as the president, and she really runs the day-to-day operation in partnership with Irene Vuvalias, who's on the East Coast, and she is the VP. I'm chairman of the board, so I'm more involved in the oversight of the organization. So that's how we started, and that's where we are. And I know it's helped a lot of people. I've received emails, and even at the conferences had people approach me and say, "I just want to let you know you saved my life."
Well, and I think what Helping Parents Heals offers is something that not only parents need, but anybody who's experienced the transition or death or passing on of a loved one, however we conceive death, is that they want to know that they can still connect with their loved ones. They want to know that their loved ones are safe, that they're okay. And they want to have that type of connection, and also a community that's going to support talking about, utilizing mediums or inquiring about how do I find a good medium to help me connect with my loved one, or talking about signs, talking about synchronicities, where that stuff isn't considered to be taboo. In early grief, there are a lot of tools that helped me in early grief, specifically getting support, reading information about other parents who had been on the journey longer than me, trying to figure out tools that they had used that could help me. But there got to a point to me, Mark, where I needed more. And through the inspiration of a interfaith minister whom I met through pure serendipity, it would take me about another 2 hours to outline that. She facilitated a spiritually transformative experience that allowed me to believe that our consciousness survives after death, and that we can form continued bonds with our loved ones and learn to transform the relationship, integrate the best parts of our loved ones who we are, and move forward with a redefined narrative in life, if we so choose. And I had been primarily science-based, but as I've come to understand, there are certain things that science can't explain, either by itself or in its entirety. That there
Or
are
at large have chosen to ignore and not explore.
exactly. And I think of Bruce Grayson, who, the founder of IONS, who wrote the book After, and with his research and near-death experiences. And that book is also an exercise in critical thinking. And, he came from a family where both his parents were chemists, so you can't get any more science-based than that. He said, and I'm paraphrasing this, is that if something occurs that doesn't immediately have a scientific explanation for it, then it's your job as a scientist to see if there's a scientific explanation for it. If there isn't, can we accept the fact that the event is real, but science can't explain it? That is, to me, the element of critical thinking. We entertain perspectives that are different from ours and see if we can expand our belief system as a result of opening ourselves up to that.
Yeah. I think Bruce has done great work with all the NDE research and the other folks at UVA with the reincarnation research and all those sorts of things. So I just wish there were more people and more academic institutions doing research and looking into some of these phenomena, but it's still unfortunately taboo to some extent.
I wish there was more that was being done to embrace more of an integrative philosophy and to take a look at different perspectives to explain behavior, to explain our place in the world. And really, Mark, for me, the jump between psychology and spirituality, I don't think is as big as we think it is. I think there's a lot of overlap if we choose to look for the similarities. So, well, let's get to your work for a minute.
Sure.
Tell our audience about the experiences that inspired you to explore, in your words, and I'm taking this from your book, The Persistence of the Soul, Life's Deepest Mysteries.
I have to go back to my childhood and growing up with the father that I had, because I had the benefit of living with a very unusual dad and saw things and experienced things from a young age that most people have never experienced and would have to rely on blind faith for. And that would include psychic phenomena, but also mediumship. At the time back, my dad was doing demonstrations when I was a kid. It was the 1960s into the 70s. It had to be presented in secular venues more as entertainment. He did a great job with that. Now and then, or at his own church, because he had an interdenominational church, that's where the mediumship was really on display. But even in the secular venue, he would be doing a psychic work, and then all of a sudden, somebody would pop in and he'd say, "I've got your uncle Jason here, and he wants to say hi, and, he's showing me like something that you love, apples or whatever, and go off with a lot of specific information." And this person's just like, yes, and very touched. And then it just at that point as a kid, I'm like, wow, this is real. We really do go on. I'm kind of a blend of the analytical and the right brain, to where I'm trying to think, well, how does this work? These bodies and this brain and all this, and where are they, and how come how does this work? That curiosity was there as a child, but also the confidence that it is real, but I just didn't understand it, nor does anyone else probably.
Yeah.
But then, fast forward, I become, a young adult. I go to college. I get a degree from the university. I get married where I was 21 years old, have 2 young boys early, as I became a father at 25, focused on a business career and kind of shifted my whole focus. Just like you were focused in science and academia, I was focused in the business world and my career and advancing that and everything. My young son, Brandon, at the age of 18, unexpectedly passed while hiking on the McDowell Mountains behind our home in Scottsdale, Arizona. That really was the catalyst to bring me back, because as shocking and painful as that was when, we were told that he had passed away, I did go back in my mind and remember those things and those experiences as a child and everything I'd seen. That kind of gave me some measure of hope. And then it really spurred my curiosity. I grew up with this, but I looked at it from afar. I never really asked my dad a lot of deep questions. Sometimes I did, but now it's my turn to do the exploration that he did in his life back when he was younger. That was really what started it off. And then there was just a series of synchronicities and experiences that told me I was on a path, told me or showed me, I guess, that I did have a purpose in this life. It was a little different than what I was doing. That path was leading me in a new direction, and it would ultimately be of service to folks and not just to me and my family.
Yeah, and I think, the deepest tragedies, and I could speak from experience with the transition of my own daughter, Janine, is that's led me on a path that I never would have willingly embraced, but I've been able to thankfully commit to service and try to help others. And hopefully leave some meaningful tracks when I begin dancing in another dimension when I'm done in this lifetime. So it's just some of the most beautiful things I think arise as a result of our challenges with tragedy. And it's hard to see that at the time, but time is always great to put things in perspective. And looking back, I can see that the challenges that I experienced with my daughter's transition has led me on a meaningful and purposeful path that, again, I would have never willingly contracted for in this lifetime.
It's like you lose something in a way. You don't really lose it completely. It's just different. But you lose something, but then you gain something else.
Yep.
I was looking like counting my blessings, and some folks will have like 2 kids, and if one passes, they're so focused on the one that passed, they don't show gratitude for the one they have and express the love and commitment to that other child too. And that's sad. So yeah, it does move you into a different part of the universe when that happens, it changes a lot of things in your life.
And I think in order for us to move through grief, we need to be able to embrace perspectives that we wouldn't have embraced prior to our child's transition in order for us to grow in a new reality. If I tried to build my post-Janine life with the same tools that I used to build the foundation of my beliefs and values, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd be stuck. And that foundation had to be different. I had to add different pieces that reflected the paradigm shift that I needed to eventually embrace.
And you had to open your mind. And that's tough to do because people's worldview is part of how they define themselves, And when you strip that away, that can be very threatening to people. So, and like I said before we started, I credit you with being that voice because there's a lot of folks with a science background or a scientific mind that will listen to someone like you and say, well, how did that work for you? What path did you go down to get where you are? And tell me more about that, which is great.
I'll share that story anytime, anywhere, because I believe my journey can be of help to somebody else who maybe was in the same position as me, who just embraced science and no other alternative explanations for behavior.
It's just a method, right? I mean, ultimately, it's a method to investigate things and inform hypotheses and look in and test them and all that kind of stuff. It's not really just a position, but it's treated as a position in many areas. And like a lot of people's mindset and their worldview, they see it as a position.
Positions are made to be changed if we're open to different perspectives that will allow us to consider that change. So,
yeah. From the heliocentric universe or solar system to plate tectonics, all these things,
Yep.
And those are just, material things or physicalistic things. But nonetheless, it shows science is often pulled along dragging,
Yeah. And in reality, Mark, we live in a multidimensional universe. We just need to open ourselves up to that idea.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the breakthrough for me really was when I first learned about quantum mechanics. For me, just the 2 big things were like the observer effect and like, wow, mind really does affect matter.
Yep.
And consciousness must have mastery over matter in a way, So therefore it must be first or primary to have that relationship with matter. And matter's just energy and vibration. And then entanglement's the other one that it's like, well, how can all this information pass and how do people get these feelings and all? For folks that don't know what entanglement is, it basically states the 2 particles that have ever come into contact or been in a special way could be separated as far apart as the opposite ends of the universe. But whatever happens in one instantaneously affects the other, which seems to violate Einstein's law of special relativity. Because really, if you could travel the speed of light from one end of the universe to the others, it would take hundreds of millions, if not billions of years to traverse that at 186,000 miles per second. There's definitely something more here. And it seems to be some sort of interconnectivity that's not here at this linear kind of plane or whatever. It's underneath. It's part of the structure. I can only imagine what it could be, but it just points me in those kind of ways of thinking.
Yeah. And everything really ultimately is interconnected. When we get right down to it, it is. And even things that don't appear to be connected are connected. Like you could see a heart shape in a coffee cup, two totally different forms of energy, but it fits. It's a sign. You just take a look at kind of groupings that don't appear to fit, but yet they do fit to give you one coherent message that, believe in the survival of consciousness, that our energy can be transmuted and communicated in a variety of different forms, again, if we're open to it. So
you had asked about the catalyst for this, and one of the first things that happened was two things I'll just tell real quick. One was a personal experience. I wanted a direct kind of connection with my son. And so I went and sat in a darkened closet and tried to meditate. I was able to quiet my mind, and I saw his face scroll across as an image, and it was glowing and joyful. I felt joy. And then right after that, I saw an image. It was a cross with an oval loop at the top. That I'd seen people wear those, but I didn't know what it was. I had to go Google that. And it's an Ankh, which is the oldest cross of human history. It's an Egyptian symbol going back, I think, 5,000 years. But the lower portion, the cross represents physical life, and the oval loop represents eternal life. And it was telling me that my son was happy, joyful in eternal life. If I'd already known what the symbol meant, it wouldn't have had the same meaning to me, being somewhat analytical. And then it was 3 days after Brandon's passing that I made contact with my uncle, because my dad had passed by then, but my uncle had similar abilities.
Yep.
And he said, Mark, I wanted to tell you something. He says, I couldn't get anything last night when I tried to meditate, but this morning your dad came to me, and he wanted you to know that he was there for Brandon when Brandon transitioned. Brandon was somewhat confused at the beginning, but your dad helped him understand and adjust. Brandon wanted you to know that you're the best parents he ever could have had, which is the fuzzy thing we like to hear. But then he gave me the evidence, because we didn't know the cause of death at the time. And he says, your dad said Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that caused his heart to fail. 2 days later, I think it was 3 days later, I talked to the physician and conducted the autopsy. And she says, well, your son's death was caused by a severe asthma attack that drove his blood oxygen levels down and caused cardiac arrest. So, that was a big deal for the family and friends to have that piece of evidence 2 days before the autopsy. That really was, I think that was really one of the key catalysts that pulled me back in and made me want to go deeper and look into it more extensively. And it was very healing for all of us too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to get that type of specific information just makes the source of that just more credible. When it's that specific and something that would only be known to the family, or even information that wasn't known to the family that's communicated, that would be pretty convincing evidence to me of the survival of consciousness and the persistence of the soul. Which brings me into my next question, your newest book, which is, by the way, fabulous. It's just a great mix of scientific research, work melding the worlds of both science and spirituality to help us get a better understanding of the role of evidentiary mediums, near-death experiences, reincarnation. You covered the whole gamut in this book. So with that, tell our listeners about the book and what you want them to take away from it.
Sure. I have a copy here, but essentially what I tried to do here was continue a personal narrative like I had in the first book, because I had so many more experiences that were direct personal experiences to share, but then with mediums and other kinds of synchronicities and things, I wanted to share those, but I also wanted to support what I was saying with the research that's been done. So it's really a kind of a different book. Some people like that and some don't like it as much. Some, want more of the personal stories, some want just the science, but I give you kind of a blend of that. So I cover a pretty wide range of evidence, but more focus on the mediumship than anything, just because that's my area of expertise. But I do touch on the near-death experiences and some of the other forms of phenomena that are evidentiary for life after death, or the continuity of consciousness after physical death. I go through that. I've got a chapter that's on the history of religion, as talking about that, because a lot of folks in our country or other places get more hung up on that and think, I shouldn't go there, this is bad stuff or whatever. So I talk about that openly and frankly, looking at it from a variety of perspectives. I have a chapter on an experiment I conducted with my sister before her passing, where she left behind a secret code. And then I sought mediums afterward to see if they could deliver that code. It was put into a sealed envelope until after her passing. I have a chapter on skepticism and the difference between open-minded skeptics and closed-minded, dogmatic people. Just like religious fundamentalists, but just a different kind of religion, right? Talk about reincarnation. So it's a broad scope. I give you a lot of the evidence that's been done in the lab, going back to the origins of the Society of Psychical Research, which was founded in London in 1882. Some of their early work, through some of the stuff from Duke University and J.B. Ryan, his work, which tend to be more in the area of telepathy. He started out doing more the psychical research, but he got such a hard time from the academic skeptics that he shifted gears and kind of went more the psi phenomena route to look into those phenomena more. I'm friends with Trisha Robertson, who's with the Scottish Society of Psychical Research, and she's done some good work with Professor Archie Roy, who's since passed, but he was a very well respected, one of the top scientists in the UK. And then like the Windbridge Research Center, they're doing good work still. That's an independent small group of basically a husband-wife team. So we talk about, needing more resources. University of Virginia still got the Division of Perceptual Studies, and they're doing more and more. Yep. It's a cross-section of personal experiences, the research that's been done to support what I'm telling people about my experience and where it fits, and just kind of educate folks in terms of these phenomena, what the terminology is, and what it looks like and how it feels. I interviewed 2 psychic mediums so you can understand what they experience when they do a reading. When they say, I see this or I hear this, how do you hear it? How do you see it? How do you feel it? Because those are questions I had. And I had some of my own experiences too, that I could kind of understand from that perspective. But I thought people might have that same curiosity, like, okay, I had this reading, it was really good, but they said, my loved one said this or showed them that. What does it mean exactly?
Yeah. And one of the things that struck me immediately was William James, who was credited to be the founder of psychology. He was involved, I think, with the Society for Psychical Research in London. And I forgot the name of the medium that he was involved with off the top of my head, but he wrote a paper, an essay, really claiming that what she saw and how she did it was valid. And
he ran the American Society of Psychical Research, which was partnered with the one in London. So yeah, it became almost like a branch of that. But it was a medium in Boston. I'm trying to remember her name. It'll probably come to me. But yeah, I think it's the Boston medium that he was talking about.
Okay.
The name escapes me at the moment. But you're right. He was on board, and he's very meticulous in his work and his research. Not easily convinced, And a lot of people don't know this. They're dismissive of the research that had been done in those early days. But those scientists were some of the brightest minds in the world at the time. That would be like the top shelf scientists today actually looking at these things, which would be great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it should be dismissed. Those are just the building blocks for later work. But it's just kind of petered out over time to where there's just not as much being done. It has been proven pretty much. If you look at the research that's already there, it's not like it has to be done again, but people don't read it or understand that it's there. To look at it and read the evidence and see what it has to say. It'd be nice if people wanted to replicate some of those things. Great. But in the meantime, the evidence and the data is there for people who have the time. And so that's part of what I try to do, is put as much of that in there as I could within one book to give kind of a cross-section of information.
I loved your chapter too, the skeptical neurosis, because you talked about the difference between healthy skeptics and debunkers. Why is healthy skepticism, I think, helpful to someone who may have doubts about the survival of consciousness or evidentiary mediums? How can skepticism help them assess their validity?
I just think critical thinking is important. And so you have to look at all possibilities and all potential explanations for any phenomena that takes place. So I think when you go through that process yourself, and if you have an experience and you take the time to really look at it and give it a fair shake to say, have I considered all the easier explanations for something and none of those fit, and I know that this is on the up and up, then, maybe there is something to this. Whether that's a reading, whether you had a dream visit and it had information that you later found to be true or correct. I just think that skepticism is a healthy attribute. I've seen folks who would get a reading and they're just a little bit too anxious to confirm everything. They want it to fit. Of course you do, because you want to be healed. Then you have the others that are closed off. And I see this with the testing too, when I do the tests of the mediums under blinded conditions, where I have to get the best sitters that are really balanced. I get some that say everything's right and everything's highly evidential. And then I'll have others that are like, oh, nothing at all. And then you go back through it. What about this? What you said this fit, but this is the same thing as that. I just think being balanced in your approach to life in general and looking at things in a balanced way makes sense. If you have done that work to look at things from both perspectives, then you'll have more confidence yourself that what you experienced was real, even if you don't understand how it happened.
Absolutely. And I think, scientific inquiry is a requisite for being a good scientist. I mean, we need to be curious if something we experience may not fit traditional scientific explanation. So we should be skeptical. We should take a look and see, okay, is there a scientific explanation? If not, what are some other explanations that can account from what I observed and experienced to be real? And I look at Eben Alexander before he went public with his experience. In his book, Proof of Heaven, he had an appendix where he tried to dispel the near-death experience he had through scientific explanation. He looked for every possible explanation of brain functioning that could account for the experience that he had other than near-death, but he came to the conclusion that his brain was so involved with bacterial meningitis that he couldn't have had the vivid experience that he had, or the vivid recall that he had of another dimension. And, he's shared that story. I mean, he's really obviously evolved as one of the really featured speakers on the afterlife circuit.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. I met Eben a couple of times, once at a conference and also another time at the Rhine Center, which is near Duke. Mm-hmm. And Sally Rhine was there, and it was a celebration of life for William Roll, who was a parapsychologist. And I stood next to Eben, and I quoted him in my book there, where he was describing what had happened. He goes, you know what this means? It means that consciousness is primary. And that's right. So, yeah, he's done good work. There's a lot of folks that are doing good work. And it's interesting. All of them have gone through some sort of major experience of some sort, whether it's a spiritual experience or a near-death experience or whatever, and kind of push them to do this, I think. If academia never gets there, maybe it's a grassroots kind of thing that moves the dial. People like you and me sticking our necks out.
Yeah, and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to stand for what I believe, but at the same time, I tell anybody who listens, look, you're not supposed to believe everything I'm telling you. You don't have to align with it. Just consider it. Just listen to it. Hold space for it. Consider the possibilities, and see what you think. And then, if you don't, fine. That's your call. But at least you've listened. And at least
some of your students that are going through this material with you today, they may care less about it today, but 20 years from now, they're going to lose somebody close to them. Yep. And then they're going to say, wait a minute, what was that we talked about back then? And then they'll dig it back up, and that happens.
Well, the other thing is when we talk about the spiritual aspects of dying, we talk about Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson's work with reincarnation studies. I mentioned the division of perceptual studies with Jim Tucker. We talk about Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, his work with past life regression therapy. I tell my students I want to expose you to all of this because this is part of the discussion of thanatology now. You're going to have somebody come up to you who's experienced a loss, and they're going to say, I believe I got a sign from my loved one. And we do talk about after-death communication as well. I believe that I have a 3-year-old nephew who is reciting memories from a past life. How can I find out if this is true? You don't necessarily need to believe it, but you need to be versed enough in it so that you know how to respond and who to refer people to. And you can do, I tell my students, you can do that without compromising your belief system, but ethically you have to hold space for beliefs that are different from you. Treat that with respect, treat it with dignity, and provide the necessary resources. And if you don't know what those resources are, refer to people who do.
Yeah, no, that's a good approach, I think.
So what is the What does the research indicate about the value of evidentiary mediums in grief therapy? What has your research uncovered with this, Mark?
I haven't done a ton of research, just my observation of how people respond to this when they have a good session. I think Dr. Julie Beischel at Windbridge has done actually a formal study on that and found that it's had a significant positive effect on people to have a good evidential mediumship reading in combination with therapy. And it's much more effective than therapy alone, is what she found. And I would say that's true, because really helping parents heal. We did have mediums come in and do gallery readings at times, but kind of come up with what I call the 5 pillars of healing. I've got the number one, support from family and friends. Hopefully you can get that. Not everybody can, but if you have a supportive family who understands and is willing to talk about your loved one and embrace your situation in an open way, that's great. Number 2, meeting other people who have been through the same thing as you, so you can relate to them. Helping Parents Heal can help with that. You've probably met other folks that are in the same boat, and that helps because they can talk the same language and understand what it feels like. Because if you haven't had a kid pass, you can't understand. It's a different deal. Third, I would say, is service, and that's what you're doing now, providing a service to try whatever you give comes back to you. It helps heal you. Some folks will set up like a foundation of some sort. One woman in Florida for organ donation that I know, and others for cancer research, for a specific type of cancer that took their kid's life, for a soup kitchen, whatever it may be, but service would be that third. Fourth one is tough. The fourth one is feelings of guilt and anger. It could be either like guilt, self-imposed guilt, like I could have stopped this, I should have seen the signs, I should have done something different. Or the anger might be directed towards a medical professional you're blaming for the passing of your kid, or someone who was driving the car that hit your kid and they died from that. And then the fifth one is openness to spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence. To me, that's the hope element. And that's kind of what differentiates, helping parents heal, because we allow that. And when folks actually see something that's highly evidential, like a medium does a gallery reading for a group of people and they don't know anyone in the room, and they're coming through with names and specifics, favorite hobbies and favorite foods and what the kid's personality is like, it changes lives. So it definitely can be positive. Conversely, if you have somebody who's a fake or a fraud, or who just thinks that they have this ability and they don't, that can be damaging. It's very important to make sure you're dealing with the real deal.
And I know you have a very rigid process for certifying mediums. I know you have a website called Find a Certified Medium. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so what qualities do you suggest that individuals look for if they want to find a good evidentiary medium?
Well, you could either go to a site like that one where I've already vetted them, because I've modified the process, the protocols about 5 times or more. I keep refining over and over, really to raise the bar. And more recently, I was really focused more on accuracy, and I've shifted to accuracy important, but more on evidence. I would get people that would, they'd have a high accuracy percentage, but it'd be, wait a minute, this isn't quite what I want, because you said, well, grandmother loved to cook. That may be true, but it's correct, but it's not really evidential.
No.
Tell me that grandmother loved to cook lasagna on Christmas. Okay, there's some evidence there. The new protocols are basically going 1/3 accuracy, 1/3 evidence, and 1/3 a subjective grading from the sitter. So they have to assess really in their own mind. It's a subjective process. It really is ultimately, how good was that reading? How good was the evidence? But the evidence slice, the third that I, grade on evidence, I stipulate like how many statements need to be highly evidential to count and give them that higher grade.
Yep.
So it's a balance of those things. They have to do these readings blind on Zoom, videos off. They don't know who they're going to read for. They get the first name of the sitter at the time of the reading, and then they just kind of dive in, and it's recorded. And then, after 10 minutes or so, if the sitter wants to, they can ask, can you please connect with so-and-so, first name only, and then see, what they get. This recording is then transcribed and graded statement by statement. then the statements are either correct, incorrect, or indeterminable. Or they can be correct plus they're evidential. So it would be both. My passing mark is 75 points now, which you could kind of look at that as 75%. It's like, okay, the accuracy piece, if you were 75% accurate, that would be 75 points. But then there's a scale for how many evidential statements they have. And then you have the subjective sitter grading. So yeah, you could go to that site. If you know any trusted friends who have gone to one that had a good experience, that's great. But really the keys are, as if you want to have a good session and you're confident you're getting somebody good, first, you don't want them to really know anything about you, or your loved one who's passed. It's kind of hard to avoid that if you're going to do a booking, because usually you're going to be going to a website and putting your contact information in and paying. If that bothers you, I would just say the people that are on my site have already been vetted, so you probably wouldn't have to worry, or you don't have to worry. Or even if you go to somebody else, you could have somebody else book it for you and then just call it a gift. And then you can pay them back later. And then when you show up there, it's like, hey, this was gifted to me by, and then the good mediums are going to be able to live with that. They may not all like me saying that, but most of them really wouldn't mind that much, as long as the person shows up for the time that's booked and everything else. But you don't want them to know who you are, if you can avoid that, or at least have minimal knowledge. And quite frankly, some of them are so busy and they're doing these back to back to back. They wouldn't have time to do that kind of stuff anyhow, even if they were so inclined, which I know that none of the ones I work with would ever go down that path. During the reading, you really don't want to spill your guts too much. You just want to let them tell you as much. Let them talk. You can ask questions. You could confirm like, yes, that sounds right. Or yes, I understand. But just don't go off and say, oh yeah, that's my son. He had cancer. He was 20 years old. Don't do that, because you're feeding them. Not only feeding them, you're robbing yourself of information they might tell you without having you say anything that is going to mean the most to you. So I think those are the key things. There's a thing called cold reading that a lot of skeptics will point to and say they're reading your body language and your responses. So, you don't have to be stoic. You can be friendly, and it's important to be friendly, but at the same time, just don't volunteer too much and try and minimize your expressions to some degree. But if the reading's really, really good, you might start crying. You might start laughing. It can be a very joyous thing.
One of the things I've understood is that they may not get everything. They may be hit and miss on some things, but what they connect with, particularly if it's evidence-based, is going to at least get the sitter to consider the possibility of the afterlife or the survival of consciousness, or that there are other dimensions that we go to when our time in the physical world is done. So at least we'll get them to consider those possibilities. When I was facilitating a parent support group here locally, one of the parents told me that she had gone to a local medium 3 times. And the medium told her, look, you can connect with your son yourself. You can connect with your daughter yourself. I can show you how to do that. I can give you some tips where you can connect. I would refer any parent I ever talked to who wanted a medium, he would be one of the first ones I'd look at, because there's also an ethical fabric to what he does.
Absolutely. Most of the ones I know will tell people like, hey, you need to learn to connect yourself. And you don't want to become a medium junkie either. It should be used sparingly, I would say, no more often than, 3-6 months apart. And I think some people, early on, they may get a few and then they don't really need it anymore. Or maybe they get one once in a long while. There are ways for people to have their own form of direct connection. The hard part there is that some people will then question the experience. Was that real? Whereas if you do see a medium, you can validate the information. If you get information or you have a visitation of some sort, people will question that. You just have to trust your heart, that, hey, I know that was real. Or maybe they give you a piece of information that you later find out, hey, they pointed to something and I found that was an accurate thing. Skeptics will say sometimes too, they'll say, well, why can't they just tell you everything with 100% accuracy? They're not hearing spirit like you're hearing me right now. They're not hearing every word and every syllable. Kind of like a game of charades in a way. To some extent, they're going to get a word here or there. A thought pops into their mind, because I've had this myself. It's very subtle. You're getting a thought or maybe an image. like the one I described earlier. You get an image in your mind. So you're getting this puzzle piece of stuff and putting that together as best you can without trying to overanalyze it. It's your job as the medium to deliver whatever comes to you, and then it should hit home with the sitter if it's valid.
And, for those debunkers out there who want to deny the value of mediums in the death system, I remember you mentioned Julie Beischel from the Woodbridge Research Center. I quote a research study that she did on mediums where they looked at the number of hits they got online to the Google phrase or search psychic medium readings. And it was like back in 2002. And I remember the exact date, Mark, because it's my granddaughter's birthday. It was May 2nd, 2002. In fact, it was the day that she was born, and that was Janine's first and only daughter. So I remember that date. But Julie Beischel stated that there were about 1.5 million hits for psychic medium readings. So in my death, dying, and bereavement class, I tell my students, go surf online, do whatever search engine, type in psychic medium readings, and tell me how many you get. I've had 3.6 million, 4.2 million. The point is, I tell my students that mediums are a very important part of the death system because of their ability to bridge both the physical world with the spiritual world and connect our deceased loved ones with us. You need to understand their role. You need to understand what constitutes good evidentiary mediums because they're here to stay. And, it's not going away. More and more people now are curious about what happens after death. They want to know where their loved ones are safe, and they're going to want to find somebody to help them connect who has that ability.
I'd say if somebody wants to just see what a good medium, what their work looks like, Google this, The Psychic Barber, Part 1 and Part 2. The Psychic Barber, it's Gordon Smith. He's a top medium in Scotland. I think he may be the best in the world. He's definitely top 3 to 5. And that shows him not only doing his mediumship work with individuals and in a gallery setting, but also with scientific experiment that was conducted that he participated in. But that would give somebody a flavor for like, okay, here's what good mediumship looks like.
Yep.
And then if somebody wants to get a reading, they can go on from there and, book a session with somebody on my side or somebody else that they referred to or whatever. And just so people know, I don't make a dime from this. I don't charge anything.
Yep.
It's just a public service. And it really started back after Soul Shift came out because I started getting inundated with people saying, who should I go see? Who's a good medium? At that time, I knew a handful, but they were more like celebrity mediums. They had long wait lists and some charged more than people wanted. So I just thought to myself, there must be other people with this ability at a high level that are just lesser known, that don't have long wait lists, that don't charge a lot. Now I've gone through this process and certified over 40 of them.
Yeah, and it's, it's a very valuable website. It's something I refer to consistently, and I just tell anybody that's interested in finding a good medium that's the place, your website is the place to start. So thank you for providing that service. I know it's helped many and will continue to help many. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is I know in your book you describe some amazing synchronicities that occurred, following the transitions of your son Brandon and your sister Robin. Would you care to elaborate on just a couple of those that occurred?
Yeah, there's so many. It's hard to remember them all, but I think the most stunning one that I ever had involved right after Soul Shift came out, and I was just getting into social media for the first time. I became online friends with a few different people. And so just to keep their names private, I'll just say mother, woman A, woman B, woman C. So woman A and I start having a dialogue. She's in New Mexico and her son had passed in an accident. We were talking about various things, afterlife evidence, the contents of my book and my experiences. Then I had a similar connection with a woman in Pensacola, Florida. The woman in Florida, her son had a bad liver and so he got a transplant, but it only lasted 6 months and then he passed. The woman in New Mexico said, hey, I'm going to go to this bereaved parents organization. This was before a Helping Parents Heal existed, but another bereaved parents organization was having a national conference in Portland, Oregon. So she goes to this, and after it happened, she sends me a note. She goes, oh, Mark, I met this woman who was there, and she had her daughter had died in a car accident, and she was really despondent, and she doesn't believe in anything. So she went there just to see if it would help her feel better. I said, well, why don't you let me know her address and I'll send her a copy of the book with a note. So she did. She got me the address. I sent her the note and I just said, I'm so sorry for what happened. And then when I noticed her address, it was in Gulf Breeze, Florida. And I looked on a map and Pensacola and Gulf Breeze are right next to each other. So I'm like, hey, I know another mother who lives right by you in Pensacola. Maybe the two of you could get together and meet you and could help each other. And so a few days pass and I get a reply back by email and said, Dear Mark, thank you so much for sending a book. That was very kind of you. I have to let you know that I already know the other person, but it's not in a positive way because her other son was involved in an accident that took my daughter's life. I'm like, there's 300 and some million people in this country. How did this happen? My God. And so I just responded, I said, I don't know how this happened or why, but I have a feeling it has something to do with healing. That's all I said. The woman in New Mexico gets back to me a little later. She goes, well, I just won this lottery thing to get me and one other person attendance at a workshop up in Montana or whatever. So she invited the woman whose daughter had passed in the car accident, and the two of them went up there. And after like a week or so, they were done. The one in New Mexico sent me a note and said, hey, Mark, I just want to let you know that she is a completely changed person after this experience. And I think there's a lot of hope with her. And then I got a note from her directly, the one who had gotten the healing process from the meeting. And she says, Dear Mark, I just wanted to let you know I'm no longer a physicist, I'm an engineer. And I knew what that meant because there was a passage in my first book that said, the difference between a physicist and an engineer is that a physicist insists on knowing how something works and the engineer is satisfied to know that it works. And then a bit later, those two women ended up working together and helping each other, one in an organ donation thing and the other for an early version of the Helping Parents Heal group. That was, I'd say, the most extreme just because of what are the odds? I mean,
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Portland, Oregon. I think I was at that conference in 2009. And one of the most amazing synchronicities for me is I was introduced by another conference presenter to a woman by the name of Janine, who spelled her name Jeannine the same way that my daughter did. And that's not a common spelling. So I'm thinking about all the 1,200 people there. I walk in, the first person I meet is Janine. And in retrospect, I realized that was synchronicity. And,
yeah.
a lot of these things were happening, but I had trouble integrating it into my science-based mind. But 7 years after Janine's transition, as I mentioned earlier, everything kind of changed with that. So can you tell us a little bit about your latest project with the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia?
Well, it was really Ian Stevenson's project. So Dr. Ian Stevenson started the Division of Perceptual Studies. He'd started all that reincarnation research that he conducted over many, many years, and it's highly compelling work where he would go to remote regions in Africa or South America for indigenous tribes where there was a story of a child who claimed to have had a past life, and they knew the name and where he was before and the spouse and the tribe's name, and he'd drive there and interview them, and lo and behold, all this stuff matched up. Ian Stevenson, though, before his passing, he decided, and this goes back to the old Houdini code thing where, you leave a secret code for somebody after you die, and then you see if somebody can get that. But he did it in a more extreme manner. What he did was he set a padlock with a 6-digit code, and then that correlates to letters or words. And then he left behind some sort of decoding device. So the people there at UVA can go check. So if somebody gives them a code, a word or words, they can check that to see if that unlocks the lock. To date, it's not been unlocked. It's something I'm trying to see if we can get through a variety of different methods, some being mediums, bring forth information. I've tried myself a little bit. I think one of the challenges is the way he set the experiment. It's extremely difficult. And one thing he did probably know much about was mediums. In saying that, I don't know that he knew how mediums get information. So when I talked before, like how it comes to them, it can be very fragmented. So what he said was, it's a 6-digit code, and it could either be a 6-letter word, which would be reasonably, not easy, but reasonable that you could get that. The 6, or it could be more than 6 letters, but if it's more than 6 letters, only the first 6 letters are decoded into the numbers. But it could also be a 6 or more word phrase, in which case only the first letter from each word counts, and that converts to a number. There are millions and millions of possibilities. If you used a 6 or more word phrase, that's going to be really tough to get, just because our mediums getting information through visual. Okay, so maybe they see an orange, and then they see a tree, and then they see a guitar. It's going to be very difficult to get that many different things all strung together that are all correct. I'm hoping he left that as a 6 or more word phrase that we could get and use. Time will tell. Doing that, it hasn't been tried before, as far as I know. One of his former colleagues, who's now retired, that he was friends with, is going to have a sitting with one of my top mediums that I know. And so I'm hoping that will cause it to work better, because that's another thing that's been shown in mediumship, is that it works better when you have a loving relationship between someone who's passed and the sitter. There's an energetic connection there. Maybe it's the whole entanglement thing we talked about before, they were in contact. That's a lot better than a sterile approach, which, Winbridge did a lot with the sterile approach, just to satisfy, the statistical part of it. But it works a lot better if you have that. So if I'm doing, like remove 3 or 4 steps where, okay, I've got a proxy sitter here and it's blind and all that, it's much harder. I'm hoping that will work. And if I had a breakthrough, I'll let you know, and we'll come back out and talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be a great follow-up podcast. If there's a breakthrough with that would be wonderful to have you back to talk about it.
But they've been great with me to acquiesce to working with me to do this and provide these responses. They've been wonderful because I know they're very busy, but they've been very hospitable and, quite frankly, interested themselves to see that thing cracked, if it could be cracked.
Well, I think the way you approach, individuals about to further research is very respectful, and it's just very, it's hard. It would be hard to say no to that type of approach. And I think most individuals in this field are more curious in terms of how can we reset the boundaries? How can we push the envelope even more? So, and I think, that's important, but I also think the approach that you provide is also important. But my last question for you, Mark, is if people want to purchase your books, want to get in touch with you, find out more about your services, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just go to my website, because I've got links to all the retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the others, not only in the U.S., but other countries as well, for the books. And then I've got a media page with other interviews and documentaries, and when I was on Discovery Channel. Then I've got a link to Helping Spirits Heal. I've got a link to the Certified Medium site. All of this is from my site, which is markirelandauthor.com. Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, author.com, markirelandauthor.com.
And I'll make sure all of that gets in the episode notes when we drop the episode on YouTube and on my other podcast channels. So, Mark, with that, thank you so much for spending time with me tonight. I enjoyed our conversation. I hope we could do it again sometime.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure. And with that, that is a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.